somewhere about 6 or 7 years ago or so, there became this, it became fashionable in this trade to do what's called a dry pack. Let me explain the whole idea of a dry pack, right? So you have a mortar, and it doesn't really matter what mortar you use. I like Sackcrete that's sold at Lowe's a whole lot better because the sand particles are larger. It's just easier to work with. But if you got Quickcrete at Home Depot or whatever they sell at all the other places, it doesn't really matter. The idea of a dry pack is simply this: when you start tapping it down on your mortar bed, right? You're not tapping it down to the point you're just banging on all this stuff. That water is easily transferred through that mortar down to your weep holes more easily with a dry pack than it would be if it was wetter and you're packing it down really, really tight. Water has because the density level is higher, water has a more difficult time to get through all the pores and everything of this mortar mix. So that's the whole idea of a dry pack. Couple of problems. One is we're not doing water in, water out system anymore. If you are, it's old-fashioned. We are doing sealed system, so no water should ever see your mortar, therefore making this whole dry pack notion very felonious. The other problem with that is every material that has cement in it, and that includes everything we work with, from the mortar to the thin set to everything that has cement in it needs water to activate. You cannot activate the compound that's in here is cement, which makes everything like supposed to be hard and as a rock and all this stuff. And it doesn't matter, brick, mortar, or whatever. It all needs water to activate. And when you don't have enough water, you compromise your whole shower pan. I get at least minimum 3 to 4 phone calls or emails every year with homeowners, DIYers, trying to do their mortar bed, and they accomplish it very well, but then the next day they have all this dust and sand particle at the surface, and they vacuum it out, and then they still have dust afterward, and they still have sand particles, and they're reaching out to me asking me, what can I do? And I tell them, just take it out, start over again. Your pan liner is already done. That's the hardest part, really. The mortar process is relatively easy, but because it's compromised, it'll be a lot easier to take out because it's usually cracked and or it has dust at the top that won't go away. So I'm like, what did you do? Well, I tried to do a dry pack. Well, here's the thing. There's no recipe. If I use Sackcrete 60 pounds or I use Quickcrete 60 pounds, they're not going to be the same recipe to get a dry pack. So how much water you're going to put in each one varies. And there's some mortar out there that's 80 pounds. So what's the recipe for 80 pounds versus 60 pounds? What's the recipe of 60 pounds Sackcrete versus 80 pounds of some other one? There is none. Is it 1 pint of water? Is it 3 pints per bag? Like how much exactly water to achieve this dry pack? And because nobody's, every time I get that call, it's like, oh, I probably didn't use enough water. Well, duh, you didn't use enough water. There is no harm and no foul in using too much water. The only harm in that is that you use so much that the next day, and I've had this happen a couple times back 15 years ago, a homeowner will call me up and I'll go out to look at their mortar pan. They've used so much water that the whole mortar pan, like lava, just goes down to the drain. Like it's a hot mess, as they say in Atlanta. Hot mess because they put way too much water, but not putting enough water doesn't activate the chemical process of your cement product. And it's my belief is that the sand particles are larger. I don't know. Maybe the mix is richer. Maybe there's more cement than there is sand. I really don't know. My take on it is the sand particles are larger, and therefore it makes it much more pleasurable to do what I have to do. Anyway, I mix this up relatively dry. So the advocates for a mortar pan that's a dry pack, they say squeeze it in your hand like a snowball, and if it doesn't fall apart, you're good to go. The problem is if I added a bunch of more mortar to this, it's still going to do this exact same thing. Again, this is very subjective. So how much somebody can squeeze in their hand and how much pressure they can put on there denotes how much this thing would fall apart. If you had some 70-year-old guy kind of squeezing and it's going to fall apart, he's going to add more water because he didn't squeeze as much as I could. Conversely, if you had some bodybuilder who does this type of repetition all the time, then he could get really, really dry mortar to compact. So the illogical, non-commonsensical way that people talk about Drypack, it just drives me up the wall. And mostly because I get those calls from homeowners and DIYers who have messed up their Drypack. Don't do a Drypack. Get off of this BS. And I'm going to just say it. It's bullshit. This whole idea of a Drypack is bullshit. It's better that you have more water. If I add a little bit more water here, I'm not going to put a whole lot, but if I add a little bit more water here and I mix it up, and it takes a while to mix up the water with the mortar. It's not, one and done type of process, because all this glob of water has to penetrate all the rest of the mortar. So I'm not doing the measurements and all that stuff because it's kind of irrelevant. I will say this, as a general rule, and things vary, I'm using about 4 spongefuls. This type of sponge from Home Depot. I'm using about 4 spongefuls full of water per bag of 60 pound, right? Doesn't matter if it's Saccrete. Back in the day I was using Quikrete. About 4 of these will get me the mix that I want. More or less. This is about the way I like it. See it clumping up like that? I like that. There's enough water to activate the cement. And it also does the same thing. Whoops, it's falling apart. It's falling apart. Why more water is it falling apart? Doesn't make any sense, right? Let me do it again. There we go. So it's not falling apart. This is about the consistency that I like it. When I pack it down, it packs much easier than if it was a Drypack. And the next day, there's not going to be no sand or dust or anything on the surface. There's just not going to be. This is about the consistency. Yeah. If you added more, I may have put a little bit more water in there. And the ratio, again, I'm not doing any type of measurement or anything like that, but it's almost irrelevant. The measurement is irrelevant. What your final product looks like is what you want to be concerned about. This is a lot more water than I would normally use. This is a lot more water than I would normally use. You can almost hear the water squeeze out of it. But this is better than a Drypack. This is preferable. If a homeowner is going to try and do their own mortar bed, I would rather see them use something like this, a little bit more wet than I would dry. And even if it got wetter, see, the thing is, what I said about the homeowner where it was like lava, they use way, way too much water to where everything just kind of melted down to the drain area. This, again, way too much water than I would use, but it's still preferable. And if I added a little bit more, and that's not a whole lot, but you see how much more this is just wet, wet, wet. Still preferable. Now, here's the issue with having it too wet. With every cement product, in theory, every cement product takes about 20 to 28 days to cure, depending on what it is. Concrete, cement, mortar, thin set, grout, all that stuff. Every cement product takes a certain amount of time to cure. So if you had it really wet like this, it's going to exponentially take longer for it to cure because the water saturation has to dry out. Now, whether or not you've compromised your shower pan, arguably, I would say no. You've compromised it by not using enough water. Too much water, okay, whatever. The water dissipates eventually, and all the components in your cement actually do the binding, which it's supposed to do. It binds together the way it's supposed to. When it dries, you're good to go. As opposed to, a Drypack. like I said, this is way too much water, and if I just left this alone, it would start bleeding out water. And if you had it in your pan, you would see it kind of rise up to the surface. The same way when people do concrete work, and what do they call that? I can't remember what they call that, but it's like this elevation of the water that comes up to the surface. And you know, like I said, this is way too wet, but this is still preferable than a Drypack. I wouldn't get it wetter than this. Kind of like on shaky ground if it was wetter than this. But if you had it like this as a homeowner, this would be better. Can I say that again? This would be better than trying to do Drypack. There is absolutely 100% no advantage to doing a Drypack nowadays. And arguably even 7-8 years ago, when the whole notion of a Drypack came around, there was still not a reason to do it then. Except for what I said in the very beginning about water being able to kind of find its way through a Drypack a lot easier than it would be, say, for something more dense and packed down. You see, water's going to have a more difficult time to kind of filter through all of this stuff and get down to your weep holes and all that stuff. Anyway, please, folks, get rid of the notion of a Drypack. Don't do that. I literally had an email. What's today? Friday? On Monday, I had an email from some guy in another state that even sent me a video, and I'll try and post that video in this video if I can. Because he sent it via mail, and I don't know if I can do that, but I'll show what he ended up with. That was one. And then 2 days ago, another guy hit me up on text, and I actually called him and told him what to do. Like, just two reach outs to me in less than a week where people screwed up their Drypack. Don't do a Drypack. I don't care what title guide you listen to. I don't care what on the internet you saw. I'm going to do my mortar bed, so I'm going to get busy on this one bag at a time. Again, as a rule, as a general rule, I use 4 sponges full of water per bag. And I use a shovel and a hoe. I use a hoe to mix it up. Oh, there's another thing too I want to talk about. One of the guys that reached out to me told me he put it in a hefty bag because there are some people on YouTube who showed literally pouring the mortar into a hefty bag, putting whatever amount of water they decided on. I don't know how they came up with the measurement, but they put the water into the hefty bag along with that, and then they just rolled the bag around on their driveway. That is 100% the wrong way to mix mortar. You know, you need a little blood, sweat, and tears, so use a hoe to mix up your, I mean, if you wanted to use one of those augers in a bucket like some guys do, okay, it's still going to be better than a hefty bag. But it's a lot more stress on your auger. It's a lot more, you know, these 5-gallon buckets. I wish they made a 10-gallon bucket much easier to use an auger, but I've never used an auger. I always use a hoe and then the shovel just to shovel it in. So another little tidbit, don't use a hefty bag to mix your mortar. I did a measurement because at the very beginning of the video I talked about how there's no definitive measurement on how much water per bag. And so I said 4 spongefuls. And so what I did is I did a measurement in this bucket, this Home Depot bucket. And so it's right at 3.5 liters, which would equate to, what is that, 5 pints? I don't know why they don't have half gallon. Anyway, 5 pints of water, or 2.5 liters. Is what I use per bag. More or less. Not too much less. You still want to be able to, you know, to literally do with your mortar what you want it to do. I hope it helped the homeowners who get the dusty stuff on their pan. When I come back Monday, I'm going to show you how monolithic and strong and dustless this pan is. Am I going to show that? No. Is this video going to go up before Monday? I think this video might go up before Monday. I don't know. But I'll show you the end results of what this job, of what I did here. We get so focused on stupid stuff here. Doesn't even matter. And then tile's going to cover. Tile's going to cover the whole surface. You know, but whatever. Anyway, I'm out. If you're going to call me for advice, please donate $50 for 30 minutes. My link to my PayPal and my Patreon account is down below. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so you get immediate notifications as soon as I post videos. And thank you very much for your support.